and welcome back to the 40% Better podcast, where we talk about all things leadership, generally speaking, with a focus on technology. And Andrea has graciously volunteered to come on the show and talk to us about her experience and kind of how she sees that whole world. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Bill. It's a delight to be here. And I'm really excited to kind of dig into what makes high performing teams actually work in the technical expertise element, especially when technical expertise isn't enough. And so,
Yeah.
as an organizational scientist, I created the belonging first methodology, which is really the first scientifically validated framework for measuring workplace belonging. Um, and I got started in the mining industry.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I know. That's what everybody always goes, "Hey, wait a second." So my research actually started in Canada's mining sector, where we studied over 3,500 employees across 13 Toronto Stock Exchange listed mining companies. And what we found in that initial research study completely changed the way I looked at performance. And despite a 75% male sample, again, remember it's the mining industry, and so that makes sense as to why it would be male dominated, even though it was, released across the companies as anybody can take it. It was 75% male sample. What was fascinating was that non-executives scored statistically lower on belonging, regardless of gender. And so what that taught us really in that moment was that, belonging in a workplace and efficiency, speed, quality, engagement, all of those things weren't necessarily about diversity. It was about positional power, creating performance gaps. And that also predicts things like safety incidents, quality failures, and turnover.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah. And so since then, I worked with over 150,000 different employees across mining, construction, tech, logistics, manufacturing, operations, healthcare. And what's amazing now, that's 3 years post that big research project, which was a 2-year long study. And what the data shows consistently is that belonging is not a feeling. It's a measurable performance infrastructure. And when it's working, you typically see a 24% reduction in your belonging gaps, which leads to a 28% increase in performance, 18% increase in engagement, and a 16% reduction in turnover.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a really good intro, and it immediately gives me a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Um, the the knobs and levers that you found
Hmm.
that impact people's sense of belonging,
Yeah.
can you share a couple of those?
Totally. Let's dig into that. So the question that I always like to go to is like, what is belonging exactly and why does it matter for technical teams? And really, there's 5 specific indicators or conditions that have to be present in a work environment. And when you have all 5, that's what actually allows you to experience belonging. So the first is comfort. Now, that's not like the fluffy, like, oh, everybody is nice to each other. That's not what I'm talking about here. So comfort is the cognitive load management. It is, are things clear? Do you have clarity about your role, your expectations, predictable decision processes, consistent time boundaries? When you don't have those, your brain actually stops um, burning through the threat for or scanning for the threat of protection. So in organizations where they haven't really clarified or created predictability, especially in volatile times, this is where it becomes problematic because when you don't have that, cortisol rises And what happens then is that it takes up the capacity for complex problem solving. So imagine that when you do have comfort, when this indicator is actually functioning properly, what happens then is it's like freeing up RAM by shutting down like the background processes. Right? That probably lands to this audience, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's the first one. Second indicator is connection. And this is how, think of it like your information transfer protocol. Okay. When trust is high through peer recognition, transparent context, inclusive norms, information actually flows without verification overhead and at every handoff. And that's really important because when you have that trust, what happens is that you actually have oxytocin that's activated. And in cross functional collaboration, it actually accelerates. And so when that accelerates, it means that your teams can actually think through complex problems faster. So it means your quality goes up because you're not actually paying attention to the political elements. You're paying attention to what your teammates need, whether that's within your team or whether that's cross-functionally. So, really it's that cross-functional collaboration that really accelerates, and it's like reducing like latency in
Hmm.
distributed systems, right? That's what I would equate it to. And so the next element or indicator is contribution, and think of that like your intrinsic performance activation. And so when people know that their work matters, when people know that they matter, when their impact is visible and their expertise is really acknowledged, that's when dopamine and serotonin kick in. And they actually are opposing neurotransmitters. So they allocate a discretionary energy specifically for your baseline requirements. So when that dopamine kicks in, that's what's it's kind of like igniting you to lean in, to motivate, to go. And when your environment then says, oh yeah, Bill's done XYZ, or we should actually ask Bill about this because we're not entirely sure about what we need to do next. So just being called in, right, for your expertise, that actually sends a signal to your brain, and your brain goes, okay, amazing. Serotonin kicks in then, and you all of a sudden experience fulfillment, which means that even if you don't have, let's say you're operating on like 75% in the moment, right? You go into this meeting, you're operating at 75%, and somebody says, hey, Bill, we know that you can fix this. Help us. And you have been a trusted partner. You know that there's clarity. You know that you have, predictability in your environment. All of a sudden, your 75%, energy reserve shoots up. And you're like, great, I've got 110% now because I know how to help this. So it's like you actually gain energy when that third element of belonging is there and when contribution is actually honored. And so, it's like your minimum viable effort is there and is always increased by your peers when it's recognized.
Right. That makes sense.
The fourth is psychological safety. So that's your like early warning system. It is what allows people to not be afraid of social punishment for speaking up, reporting issues early, um, you know, speaking up in situations where you've already signed off on things and it's not cheap to fix anymore. It's that time where, you know, keeping people engaged and protected through friction or through conflict. And that's really where it becomes something that is really important. And that's where your cortisol drops, risk taking becomes possible, and that real time kind of error logging before catastrophic failure. Like that's where um, people aren't silencing, they're leaning in.
Right. Right.
Right. And then well-being. And well-being is basically, sustainable load balancing. And it's a mixture of protecting boundaries, but It's more so normalizing recovery. And the reason I say that is because we've entered this world right now where millions, sometimes billions of dollars are being spent on resilience training. And it's actually setting us up for failure because resilience is not a solo sport. And so what ends up happening is that, you're given a well-being app. So go do your Calm app, go do your resilience training, go sit and meditate for 15 minutes and come and bounce back. And if you can't, well, there's something wrong with you. Hmm? And so well-being is a really interesting thing because it's actually part of infrastructure within an organization. And it's not, playing ping pong, and it's not pizza, and it's not, having really great juices or any of those things. It is literally making sure that you are able to manage the capacity of the people within your team, within your environment, so that you're preventing that system degradation over time. And that doesn't mean it's not like your whole team, you know, um, uh, stops working all at once. Everybody has different levers that they're using. They have different energy reserves depending on what's going on in their life, timing of life. And so if you're not creating infrastructure for well-being so that your teammates can actually support, back off, you're looking at how they're managing capacity as a team, what ends up happening is you end up burning out your A teammates fast and furious. Your B's try and pick it all up. Your C's try, and it just becomes this complete shutdown because after a while, it's like capacity planning and redundancy, systems running at 100% utilization with no recovery, they eventually fail. That is normal. Right? And so these 5 indicators, they're not isolated variables. They're really an integrated system. And, we talk about comfort being like a prerequisite infrastructure. Connection and contribution reinforce each other. Psychological safety depends on comfort, but it enables higher order functions. And well-being is like the sustainability layer that prevents all of those other indicators from degrading over time. So, the reason that I think that it really matters for technical teams specifically is because technical professionals are, they're trained to solve complex problems, but they're not necessarily trained to build human systems that make those solutions scalable. Do you know what I mean? Like you can
Yeah.
have brilliant technical people, but that brilliant work dies in a solo or in a
Right.
silo really
Yeah.
quickly when connection is low, right?
Right.
Like you can
Right.
have quality failures because of psychological safety and um, errors that aren't being disclosed, and you can lose your best people because contribution wasn't acknowledged. And so we're seeing that more and more, especially in today's climate and with the political and economical elements that are happening across the world as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, from a I'm like in my head, I'm going down this in layers, kind of
Yeah,
from a
yeah, yeah,
behavioral. Yeah. So from a behavioral perspective, because I tend to think very behavioral system kind of um, structures, frameworks.
yeah.
Um, what are some behaviors that team leads can do to help um, improve any of those metrics?
Yeah, so I would say that if we start with, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with them in kind of a list in the order that
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
went in them, because I feel like that's always easier for people to grasp onto and make sense of. Um, so when it comes to comfort, one of the first things that you're looking at there is, before a meeting, you want to make sure that you are stating the agenda of the meeting. And what I mean by that is, you're going to tell your people, um, here's the clear agenda. This is the stated purpose. These are stated expectations and outcomes. So here's why we're doing this. Super simple, right? Here's why we're doing this. This is the start and the end of the meeting, and we're going to start and end on time consistently. We're also looking for modeling emotional self-regulation. What I mean by that is leaders regulate and dysregulate a room the minute they walk in it, whether they realize it or not. And so everybody knows that if you are going into a really hard meeting, you feel the emotion of that meeting before you even enter the meeting room. And that doesn't matter if you're on a Zoom call or a Teams call or you're in a physical room. And so, excuse me, in those situations, you want to actually acknowledge the emotion in the room without weaponizing it. I'm sensing tension. Let's address it because this is actually important. When you do that, when you define those role expectations, decision-making processes, and you say, okay, at the end of this meeting, we're going to have this decided, and this is the person who's making that final decision. What you do is you create the consistent structure and predictable rhythms so that people's nervous systems actually settle down. Prefrontal cortex is able to actually process and do what it's meant to do, which is designed to innovate and think through complex strategies. It also is able to regulate when it knows what to expect through predictability patterns. It means that even if you're going into a hard meeting, at the end of that hard meeting, that you're not going to, necessarily be torn down or be ostracized or be threatened in some way. Okay. And so, signaling that emotions are acknowledged, not suppressed, actually does that for people. It keeps their brains online. From an employee behavior, so that's leadership. From an employee behavior perspective, this is where your people get to show up without masking any of those core aspects of identity. So it means that if they're a little bit quirky, but they have that clarity and expectations, are set up for them to succeed. It means that, somebody who's neurodivergent, which, we know how many people are neurodivergent in the tech industry, right? Hello. And so it means
Yeah.
that the people who require that energy in a completely different way, their brains are using energy in a very different way. You give them that clarity and that predictability, and they will be on fire because they can use all of the energy that they have to solve the problem rather than being in threat or rather than being in a moment where they are fearful of their quirks or, of what is expected of them. So what ends up happening then is that they are not necessarily like code switching or going back and forth between like, should I say this? Should I not say this? Should I speak up? Should I not speak up? When you set the clarity and the predictability, people arrive prepared because they know what to expect. They're not second guessing, right? If you have meetings that follow predictable structures, they know what to expect. Easy. It allows people to actually make decisions through really like clear, consistent processes. And when people can focus on their energy on work rather than on self-protection, it means that they are engaged and it means that they are able to solve things faster. Quality goes up. So these are all, from a behavioral perspective, that's what you typically see. From a connection perspective, this is a behavior of what's a perspective we haven't heard? If you're not using that question alone in meetings, that's actually leaving voices that aren't necessarily your loudest. It leaves them in the background. And when we share information freely, then what happens is you actually create a lot more rationale behind decisions. And so context, background, um, that those type of behaviors of saying what perspective haven't we heard actually allows people to go, it's safe here for us to learn about each other and to see different perspectives and hear different perspectives. The other thing that's important too with connection is um, I like to call it the one mic rule, which means that there's no interruptions. Everyone finishes their thought before somebody, the next person is speaking. And so that actually really helps people, again, neurodivergent people specifically, because it allows somebody to finish their thought through, without being interrupted. And if you notice, when people are interrupted in their speaking, what happens is that they can often lose their train of thought. So something that could have been a really incredible idea can often be lost. And so doing that actually really helps people stay focused and complete their contribution of what they're saying. The other thing behaviorally, rotate facilitation responsibilities across team members. So this is something that you don't see often. Um, we often have it's the leader or it's like the second in command that is typically facilitating all of the meetings. Rotate it around. If everybody has a structured meeting template that they're using, what happens then is that anybody can run the meeting, which means everybody is seen and becomes trusted. And that actually allows peer-to-peer recognition even in your day-to-day meetings. And so, you're working through a level of connection that you wouldn't get because it's typically a top-down hierarchy. Um, Another behavior, share the why behind decisions, not just the what. And that really, makes a huge difference because it allows people to really understand rather than just reacting or defending as well, right? Like you're looking to build in a connection behavior, you're looking to build places where people get curious and they lean in and they want to know more and they're responding. They're not reacting. Um, when employees are engaged with this, when they understand that, connection is horizontal, peer to peer, not just vertical, what you'll start to find is that they actually ask really incredible questions. And when people are asking really incredible questions, what does that lead to? Really great discussions, right? And so those questions also allow people to speak up and ask questions when they don't understand. And that further clarifies either roles or lanes or success factors or things that they need to do. And so, comfort and connection then from a behavioral perspective really start to blend together and lend to each other, so that you're staying curious from different viewpoints. Um, and it keeps that information flowing freely rather than it being, a gatekeeping experience.
Yeah.
Um, contribution is, can be simplified down to, in my opinion, start with, two basic things. Acknowledge people's specific contributions publicly. Here's how your work moved this forward. Simple, right? Um, Behind the scenes, create visibility. So what I mean by that is, we have our A employees, B employees, C employees. Your C employees are typically support people as well. If you think about team sports, and that's actually where I started my career long time ago, was actually in performance coaching, and I worked with the Canadian Football League and had a number of really great players that I had the opportunity to work with. And what I always found so fascinating was that the Cinderella teams that really accelerated and really did well, they were the teams that really acknowledged their practice players. And what that meant was that the practice players felt as much part of the team as, starting quarterback did. And what's fascinating about that is that if you look at these technical high performing teams, it's often just the team A or A players, if you will, that take all the glory. And eventually what happens is that people stop showing up because they're not getting the recognition. And so name the impact of someone's contribution, not just the task completion. Um, allow those C players and B players to be as important as your A players. That actually creates, people who are stepping up and stepping in a lot forward, a lot faster is what I'm trying to say. And so you can also ask something as simple as, who helped move this forward this week, right? In a team setting, and just having them articulate, oh, Bill did, Sarah did. Um, that actually helps, really drive that engagement and that motivation and acceleration when it comes to what people are doing. And if you can set up a weekly acknowledgement of peer contributions in meetings, that is a phenomenal way to actually increase and communicate the impact of work, not just what you did, but what it actually led to, what it enabled, and what it allowed your peers to also be able to do as well. And when work becomes collaborative and the credit is shared, um, that's where you really start to see that people will dig in. They'll do more. That they always do more because of that acknowledgement, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because as you're talking through your
Hmm.
framework, I'm thinking about how it applies to our framework,
Sure. Yeah.
and the all the parallels. And we're huge on psychological safety, intrinsic motivation, and trust.
Hmm.
Um, and and one of the things that we found is that we always ask people what they want to be doing,
Hmm. Hmm.
because maybe I don't know if you can do this in the mining world, and I'm pretty sure this would be really tough in the football world. But if someone wants to change the kind of thing they're working on, in my world, in the technology world, it's pretty easy to do that. And so I've had people that were back end engineers that wanted to become front end engineers, and people that were front end engineers that wanted to become back end engineers, and people who wanted to work on a different part of the stuff the company was doing. And I even had one guy that became really great at sales, went from software engineering to sales, which still to this day, I'm
That's
like, I
huge.
can't believe that's like such a,
Yeah.
and, um, but I'm really glad that we had the environment
Hmm.
where it was okay for him to sit down in a one-on-one and go, I'm not having fun anymore writing code. I need to change something.
Yeah. Uh,
And yeah,
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
no, it's okay. Go for it.
I just I got excited about it because what I see with that, and certainly in the tech world, in the mining industry, you're starting to see a little bit more of it, but it's still one of those things. And I would say, spirits industry, mining, healthcare, pharmaceutical, you're not seeing as much change across those field construction, certainly the crane industry. Some of these like and I mean, again, like I've worked across industries. And so, I'm seeing those elements and flexibility, the willingness to learn, the willingness to explore, the ability to move laterally. We're actually seeing that as an accelerated desire within the job market across industries. So, and the reason for that is we're also actually seeing a lot of our millennials and Gen Zs go, you know what? I don't want to manage people. I don't have the skills. I don't know how to do that. You're not actually going to train me. 80% of managers never receive training on how to lead people. That's outrageous.
Yeah,
That's
it's
outrageous.
horrible.
And so because that data is out there, and I think that, our younger generations are just that much more educated in learning how to navigate systems. And, AI technology has been amazing at allowing them to understand that and navigating where they're going to go. And so when you look at a lot of these industries that are really struggling right now because they can't get people, a lot of it is because they're missing the understanding of what their people actually want. And so, what ends up happening is that each industry ends up with a reputation, and that reputation then denotes whether or not that next generation actually even wants to put their toe in the pool,
Right.
right? I don't even know if I want to test that temperature. But I think that those elements, when we're seeing them, where people are able to learn laterally and they are able to understand, different pieces. I also think that we're seeing, and certainly again in the data, we're seeing this where kids are coming out of university and master's programs. And they go, okay, well, I just did that. I learned that. I'm going to go practice it. But you know what? I'm not done with learning. People are not done with, it's not the same as, when boomers or Gen X's, finished university and never went on to do anything unless you were incredibly specialized or incredibly driven. That doesn't exist anymore. You're not done learning. It's
Right.
why we're seeing a higher propensity for 40 somethings to get back into doing their masters while they have kids running around. And all of these things it's forcing us to remain in learning mode. And when we have belonging environments, that's available to people. And the more that they can learn, the more fulfilled they are, and the more they become excited to actually integrate with other people. We are interdependent human beings. We can't exist without each other.
Right.
And so, that learning actually excites people, whether that it's structured in, a program or a university degree, or whether it's just having access to learning how to lead, or access to learning how to code, or learning how to, write great prompts for AI. It could be as simple as that. So I think that these are all things. These are all elements that really lead into belonging environments and supporting people. Because the other thing about belonging is that there's kind of a major rule to it, and that is that it's interdependent. Meaning, if we're in a work environment with each other, I'm giving you, Bill, 50% belonging. I'm giving it to you. I'm acknowledging what you need for comfort, what you need for connection, what you need for contribution, psychological safety, and well-being. And you're going to give that back to me. Now, no, it's not always 50-50, but that impact has to be there, that you are consistently showing up and we're able to measure, hey, wait a second, how much is Andrea giving? And how much is Bill giving? Because if we're not actually looking at belonging through that lens, it means that we're in a fitting in environment. And fitting in means that, hey, Bill, it's 100% on you for you to figure out what makes my environment predictable and comfortable, how you are going to connect with me, how you are going to, see whether or not I'm going to acknowledge your contributions, whether I'm going to give you psychological safety, who deserves it, and whether or not I'm going to actually check in with you and see whether or not, hey, is Bill at capacity? And when we operate in that fitting in 100% zero, that's actually what causes people to break, and that, detached engagement to accelerate.
Okay, so uh, um, I'm trying to be diplomatic to say this right now. I'm admittedly neurodivergent,
Yes.
and admittedly, I have learned a bunch of very different things through my non-traditional career path.
Yes.
I A bunch of the stuff you're saying, I totally agree with. Because but I also some of it I don't.
Okay.
So,
Tell me what you
so,
don't. Tell
so
me more.
yeah. So when I when I've got a team to operate with,
Uh-huh.
I look at first and foremost, how do I help them be happy and psychologically safe and trusting me before
Uh-huh.
anything else.
Uh-huh.
I also recognize, because I've learned how to manipulate power dynamics in an organization,
Uh-huh.
that my team will be incredibly successful from an organizational perspective, whether anybody else in the company like really says anything about it or not,
Uh-huh.
because I, somehow I've made that happen where, I'm trying to think, like, we build stuff that the company really needed. Like, my teams historically have done that, right?
Yep.
And we've historically done things that people said, that's impossible, you can't do that. And we were like, hold my beer. And then we did it, right?
Yep.
Um, and usually somebody goes, how did you pull that off and your team didn't quit? And it's because, number one, they're happy. Number two, they feel safe. Number three, they're excited about the challenge, right? Like, it's giving them a fun game to play. And I, I kind of like, I don't care about the executive recognition that much. Like, unless they fire me, right? And even then, I'm like, okay, my time here's done. And, it's like being on a sports team. Not everybody gets to stay on the team forever. Um, but like, all of I put most of my eggs in the basket of A, is my team happy? And B, are our internal and external customers happy? Because to me, that's the important part.
Well, that's your core starting place for sure.
Yeah.
So, as a leader, you have to remember, like, as you described, one of the things that you always did was you always made sure about your team first.
Right.
Not all leaders do that, Bill.
I
That's not
get that.
necessarily right. That's not necessarily a trained thing. And so, what's fascinating in today's world, because we have essentially removed a lot of the friction that we need in order to trust each other. Um, we're not navigating conflict and friction in a way that actually supports people anymore. Okay. And so when you think of leadership, your team is your core body of interdependence.
Mhm.
Always. You have to start there.
Right.
So, my suspicion would be that early on, when you put a team together, you know, um, they're clear on what their success factors are. They have a predictable outline of what the actual goal is, what their description
Mhm.
of job is, and they likely are really good at what they do.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
They don't have to be the best, but they're good at what they do. That's comfort. you've probably gotten to know these people. You know what fires them up. You know what gets them excited. You know what pisses them off. You know, because you've spent time actually developing a relationship that's trusting, not transactional, right? You're not just
Yes.
looking for
Yeah.
them to give you something. You're actually giving them and getting to know them so that you can actually understand what they need. You actually said that a couple of times when you were
Right.
talking about the team itself.
Yeah.
That
To me,
contribution element,
that's a critical piece though. Like to
totally.
me, that that seems that seems to me like a very obvious, everybody should understand that kind of um uh mental model.
Well, I can tell you based on the research that yes, it is a very obvious, but I can tell you that it's not a very executed one. And
Okay.
so that is actually the difference that most people don't understand. So when you look at your engagement surveys, a lot of engagement surveys actually show, yeah, we're doing great. Like we're mid 70s. This isn't a problem. The problem is that engagement shows you who's busy. It doesn't actually show you who's going to stay. And what we're describing, even though we might be using slightly different words, slightly different
Mhm.
language, the intention and the background behind it is of similarity. So the language that I'm using is language that we've tested over, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people,
Mhm.
um, so that it's simplified enough that anybody, including grade schoolers who are now using this, can actually go, okay, am I actually creating an environment where my peer is going to learn at their best rate just like I am going to? And, again, obviously that depends on age. But when we look at it in a team scenario within the workplace, that's actually a really important piece because if we're not all able to work, I don't know that I fully agree on everybody being authentic or what authentic might mean to you.
Right.
Okay. What I agree on is that can I go into this environment and work to my best capacity because we're all showing up for each other? That's what I care about. I care about
Right.
me being able to go into an environment and be my best self. And that everybody in that environment, even if I'm having a shit day, pardon me, bad day, that I can still go into that environment and that environment is actually going to make me better, not worse. And that's what belonging does. Fitting in, on the other
Right.
hand, is going to make you worse. And a reason it makes you worse is because you're constantly worried and self-protecting about what other people are going to do to you.
Oh. Okay, thank you. I just had an insight about how my head works.
I love that.
So, um, I learned how to manipulate my executives.
Mhm.
Um, and I believe it's a transferable skill set.
Mhm.
That because I think the executives actually want to be manipulated.
Okay.
And here's
Go with
here's the
this.
thing. Go
Yeah,
with
yeah,
this,
yeah.
right?
Go with it. Go with it.
The manipulation is always from a benevolent perspective. I'm never, trying to harm anybody, right?
Mhm.
And the thing that I realized is that, and the reason this works is I have data that they don't know,
Totally.
right? And they
Yes.
don't like their own blind spots. And so either A, two different kinds of blind spots. So one double blind, they don't know,
Mhm.
or B, they believe something to be true that's 100% wrong, or
Totally.
right. And
Yes.
so if I can go in and present to them and say, Here's something you don't know, and blah, blah, blah. And my team would like to go execute and do this thing. 99% of the time, they will say, "Oh my God, thank you. Yes. What do you need?" Which means my team and I have a ton of freedom whenever we find stuff to go do what we think is right for the company, right?
Mhm.
And the flip side's true also. Like, I get that the standard conversation is whatever, right? And we've been doing research, and in reality, this is what's true right now. And again, they're like, "Oh, we wow,
We didn't
okay.
know that.
We
Yeah,
did not know that, or we knew this other thing," and they will change their behavior.
absolutely.
Um, the hard part about that whole thing is having the emotional resilience skills to two things. One, the emotional resilience skills to even consider having the conversation. And so you have to do the work to build those skills. Um, and the second thing is the communication structure for how you present it so that they're the hero of the story.
Yep,
Like, that's the whole point, is they feel like they're winning,
sure.
right? I'm just the messenger that says, "Here, you just won," right? And I, I think because of that, I never go into meetings with executives feeling like I don't belong. Like, they just, like, I'm sure early on, the first couple times that I did this, I was sweating, but I've done it so many times now that I, like, I know that I'm going to go in, I'm going to get one of two outcomes, one of three outcomes. Yes, they're going to go, "Oh God, yes." Number two, they're going to go, "I've got three questions that I don't already have answers for." And I'm going to say, "Great, I'm going to go do research. I'll be back." Or three, they say no and they give me some piece of data that I had no idea about. And I go, "Oh, uh, okay. I, you know, that makes this a bad idea." Um, or I need to rethink and come back again with a different presentation.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, yeah, like what I would say to that, and I think all of that is especially for external consultants. I have never gone into an organization, my team has never gone into an organization and not been able to do exactly what you have just described.
Hmm.
And that is a different dynamic than being an embedded leader or being an embedded manager or being an embedded individual contributor.
But I've been doing this as an embedded manager for 20 years. Like, I started doing this as uh like, salary paycheck guy, and you
Well,
know
and then I would say, Bill, that that is like so lucky. You are one of not a lot of people.
okay,
You have a lot more people in the world right now that are feeling isolated, ostracized, and alone. We have three pandemics in the world right now. Loneliness being one of them. Estrangement is the highest it's ever been. It's 1 in 2 in the US, 1 in 3 in Canada, 1 in 4 in Europe.
wow,
That's huge. Okay.
yeah,
Um, that data is really important data because you can't be feeling lonely in your personal life and not bring that into your professional life.
right,
We have
right.
the highest levels of toxicity we've ever had in the workplace. Last year, we were at 66%. This year, we're at 80%.
What?
14%, yes, 14% jump within 1 year. So let's look at that data. And then we also have our national trust index across the globe has decreased. And so our trust index going down and our emotional intelligence plummeting. So you can't have those three epidemics plus emotional intelligence going down and have environments where people belong.
Right,
We need to be teaching this. We need to be
right,
doing
right.
this work. We need to be going in and actively working through emotional and social intelligence components to actually bring interdependence back into the organization.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
So, I think that there are, you're blessed and man, fortunate to be one of those people that have had a career where it doesn't matter where you go, you've been able to experience that. I would say that's certainly based on the data, not the norm. And so, when we look at that and when we look at the burnout rates, the
Mhm.
anxiety, the depression rates, our suicide levels, all of those things, we can see how the need for infrastructure to support people is no longer something that is a nice to have. It is it's a mandatory. It's
Yeah.
necessity at this point.
Yeah, I tend to think of it in terms of ROI
Mhm.
because I think it's
Totally.
it's much easier to sell the executives to
Mhm.
go, "Hey, right now you're getting this level of productivity out of your people, and you can get so much better with a fairly nominal investment, in training current and potential future team leads on how to operate better."
Absolutely.
Like it just seems like such a
No
uh,
brainer, right? I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
I
I
always
think
say, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think the challenge is that executives tend to think that they know how it all works. This is one of those blind spots, right? They think they know how it all works. Um, and when you think when you think you know how it all works, you lose your curiosity. And so that ongoing learning you were talking about a minute ago isn't
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
And and that the trickle down effect of that, the you know the impact on the workforce
Mhm.
um becomes very, very expensive.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah,
and that
100%.
that's a you know it's I I don't think people have wrapped their heads around that yet. It's like in sports, you talk about performance in sports teams, right?
Yes.
Like the ROI of a player is really important to the owner and to the coaches. And as soon as that ROI goes down, they're thinking trade, retirement, what are we going to do with this player, right?
Absolutely. Mhm.
Do they need different kinds of training? Because, like, what are we going to do?
Mhm.
Companies don't think about that with their employees um, in a way that's much beyond the technical realm.
Absolutely.
Like
And
if
and
yeah,
yeah, and what I would so one of the things that I always say is, belonging is the science you can feel and the ROI you can measure, because there's a couple of things that organizations actually aren't measuring.
hmm
Um, when even if you look at, like, let's break it down from a very, very basic perspective. Every organization runs engagement surveys every single year. They look at aggregated mean data. Well, your mean only gives you what the majority said. They didn't give you what
right,
your outliers say. And that hides data. And
yep,
and what I find so fascinating is that even as simple as an engagement survey isn't actually analyzed in a way that actually provides meaningful data. And so even something as simple about, how we look at people and how we measure people, if you're only looking at your turnover and your engagement scores and your performance metrics don't actually have elements that you can actually look at a dashboard and go, okay, so, Bill was amazing. He met his targets, but, what were Bill's belonging metrics and how did he actually encourage his team? How disengaged or engaged are his team?
right,
That creates a completely different metric that you're
right,
measuring for. And that's the place where most organizations are not measuring. They're not even looking at that. And what's
right,
fascinating is that if you look at the historical element of CHROs and human resource VPs. Many of them don't even know how to truly measure people metrics, because that's really only started to evolve within the past 10 years. And so if you don't have people data, real people data, where you're looking at the intersectional elements around identity, and I'm not talking about DEI here. I'm talking about,
Hmm.
even if we just look at level of leadership, how many years you've been in tenure, what division or what function you're in, what some of your background knowledge is or your education is. And if you aren't measuring even those 5 basic things to actually see how all of those people are being are leaning in or not, that tells a very different story than looking at
Right.
your engagement metrics and who's engaged and who's not.
Yeah. I tend to look at outlier data a lot rather than the middle of the bell curve
Mhm.
because um, I, I get better insights.
Absolutely. You always will.
And yeah, yeah, I always want the outliers. But the other thing is like, and I noticed this pretty early in my career is getting, and this it goes back to psychological safety, right? Is getting people who are shy and introverted and maybe have social anxiety, getting them to contribute to the teams, uh, and to the ultimately the company at the same level as somebody who is more extroverted, um, has always been one of my goals,
Yeah.
right?
So
Like I'm always,
that's
yeah,
yeah, that and just to clarify, that's actually not psychological safety. That's actually comfort. Um
okay,
and so, psychological safety is really only one fifth of what you need. But 100%, like, when you're looking at those elements, if you can't create comfort for somebody when you're initially in those starting phases of your relationship, they will always think that you're a threat, and they will
right,
never actually, um, they will always produce cortisol when you are in their presence,
right,
always. And if
yeah,
you're creating cortisol in somebody's presence, it means that you do not have freed up cognitive capacity, regardless of whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, to actually engage so that you can actually have connection and get to know each other. That cannot exist.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that totally makes
Does
sense.
that
I
make
I don't,
sense? Yeah.
yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm like, uh, I don't. That isn't how I've thought about it in the past, but yes, that totally it goes back to we're saying the same thing, we're just using different words. Um, that you said a few minutes ago, but yeah, that's exactly it. And uh, I th- I think about and operate, and teach people how to not be threatening, like how to change your behavior so that those people who don't have a trust of leadership, um, can can start to dial down their lack of trust and and actually start to trust you,
Mhm.
because otherwise, like, if my hypothesis is that if you don't trust the team lead, then no matter what, it's going to have a negative impact on your performance at work. I just can't. I've never seen a scenario where somebody didn't trust the team lead and still was a high performer. Like I've just never seen that. I'd be delighted to find it one day, but you know, yeah,
Yeah. And that I don't know. I have no data for you on that. Um, but it's certainly, again, going back to the difference between that would be a fitting in versus a belonging environment, right? And so if you're looking at not trusting your team lead, which is an element of connection, um, you know, it also means that you're not going to be leaning into your fellow teammates either.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
what will happen then is that you continue to just replicate and buy whatever the narrative said about you. And rather that being of good intent, that becomes of ill intent at some point in time, because that's what happens when trust deteriorates. We lose the ability to actually see the good in someone. And when someone
Mm,
is
yeah.
ostracized or isolated, it also leads to negative beliefs about another person, right? It's the
Right. Right.
um uh in German it's called Schadenfreude, and what it means is like throwing shade at someone because they've harmed you, and so you want them to fail.
Mm,
And the brain actually does that naturally. Like that's a biochemical neuro response. And so what's fascinating about that is that at one point in time in history, um, we actually had infrastructure to break that down. If you look at, Ubuntu, which is, some of the South African ways of living, if somebody commits a crime or does something wrong, they call them into a circle and they shower them with love. And to help them understand what they have done wrong so that they can actually make amends, and it shifts the actual connection between all of the people and that one person. We don't do that in society
yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
And so when we look at all of these different ways that people have evolved, when you look at people who make mistakes and fault, and where systems and structure is there to allow us to make mistakes and try and admit and challenge without that fear of social punishment. That's psychological safety. That's what that piece is. And that's where you have, what I call kind of like having protection while you're going through conflict or friction. Um, but when we're looking at navigating how we actually get the most out of our people now, that's where we actually have to set up some of these conditions again so that people understand how they actually operate at their best self in a team, and how the team supports the teammates in order to
Right.
operate at those best selves. And
Yeah.
so that is a very different dynamic, and does require, um, I would say, more um, social intelligence, and um, the emotional intelligence follows when you understand what the infrastructure is, and how you can actually leverage and benefit from it. And so, I think the most dangerous part of what's happening in the world today is that most people don't have language for what's going on in their environment. They just know that they're unmotivated, or they just know that something's wrong. And they, maybe think that they're in the wrong job, or they're not cut out for what they're doing, or they need to find their passion somewhere else, right? You hear that all the time. But often, it's not the work. It's the impact of their work being invisible. It's the impact of them being invisible.
Right.
And so, even when we look at this notion of 50-50 and the indicators of belonging, um, it requires us to understand what we are giving and what we are receiving. And so even I just recently published a belonging health check, so that you can actually see simple questions for each indicator from both sides, and what you're bringing and what you're receiving. Because sometimes you're pouring energy in, but nobody's naming it. And sometimes you're so focused on your own work that you're actually not acknowledging the team and the people around you. And so once you can actually see that gap, and so, once you can actually see that gap and you can close it and you can say with confidence that these are the words or this is the language or, this is the indicator that is actually problematic, whether that's for me or for someone else, it allows you to have a different language that takes you deeper. And so it allows not only belonging to be measurable, but it also predicts performance and it gives you agency. And so, you know, back to what you always love to go to, Bill, and I appreciate that so much about you. Um, but you always talk about the revenue impact, like what's belonging revenue impact. And so, for a 10,000 person company, if all workers are feeling high belonging, productivity gains can reach up to 52 million annually. Like those are
Nice.
big numbers, right? Organizations where you actually have belonging, they grow revenue more than 3 times faster. And so when we're seeing belonging rank among the top 3 reasons employees are saying that they're leaving jobs, that also converts into a very high deficit and risk factor. So, from an engagement perspective, highly engaged teams typically perform better. Well, if it's driven by belonging, it actually shows a 23% higher profitability, an
Nice.
81% lower absenteeism, a 43% lower turnover, 10% better customer ratings. Like those are big deals, 18% higher sales. So you're looking at not only, okay, yes, we have these 5 indicators and it's great, Andrea, that you can measure these things. But as I said earlier, you know, it's measurable, which means that you're tracking, you're governing, you're improving, and you're also able to, depending on what type of dashboards you have or what type of middle management elements you build, you can also see in real time how you're doing. And so whether you're running a construction site, a logistics network, a tech platform, whatever it is, having that at your fingertips also changes the conversations, how you're showing up. And that really does change the way teams um, deliver, the quality that they're bringing, the speed, and then generally just overall how they're actually performing at their best. And I think when you're in an environment where you're able to perform at your best, you are always going to want to stay and do more in that environment.
Yeah.
Bottom
Yeah.
line.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in my head, I'm always thinking, what's the CFO going to say? And so, which is why I'm always like, okay, what's the
Totally.
ROI?
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I'm never been in the CFO's office in that role, right? I've always been the technology guy, but I learned early on that if I go to pitch them on something that'll help with belonging, that'll help with engagement, and I can give them a positive ROI, they're writing me a check right now. And so, I think that's part of the conversation that always helps the CFO and anybody else in the C-suite who's numbers driven is what's the ROI? And like lead with the ROI. Hey, would you like to make all these numbers better? And by the way, reduce your recruiting costs because
Yeah.
recruiting today is insanely expensive.
Well, and
um,
even bad hires, right? How many
oh
organizations
yeah,
are looking at bad hires and the cost of bad hires?
yeah, yeah. So all those things are we want all those things to get better because at the end of the day, it's better for the business. They make more money, their profitability goes up, their headaches go down, and it's a win all the way around. And the customers are happier, which I'm like, well, that's like the kind of like the perfect trifecta, you know? So
Absolutely.
this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. For anybody who's wondering why she's wearing different clothes now, we actually had to record this twice, full disclosure, because she lost power. That's what happens. Welcome to we're the
Canada. And where
Canada.
we have crazy storms that
Yeah. Yeah.
Take us out
I'm not in
sometimes.
Canada, which is I'm in California, so but still, we lose power here still. Like, no matter where you are in the world, we're subject to electricity. So this has been awesome. I really appreciate it. Um, how can anybody get hold of you?
Yeah. So, what I would suggest is go look at how you can. Now, this is a very, very basic health check on belonging, but I highly encourage people to go and check this out because it'll show you a score for yourself, it'll show you a score for the other person, and it'll give you an overall score. And what that is a belonging health check. So, it basically asks you 10 questions, which is not a lot, but you'll get a score of whether or not your belonging is strong or fragile in a relationship that you're thinking at. You can use that for work, for home, your team, your manager, whatever. And so if you want to access that really simply, just go to belongingfirst.com/belonging breakdown. And as I said, you'll get 2 scores, and then you'll actually be able to say, "Ooh, wait a second, maybe I'm inconsistent here. Maybe that person is inconsistent there." And it'll just show you a very quick overall. And then if you're curious, you want to go more, you can actually do a full assessment, and that actually takes you into which of the indicators you're struggling the most with. It'll give you more language. So that's a great thing for you to do. I'm also on LinkedIn, so join me on LinkedIn. So Andrea D Carter is my handle name, and then Substack is andreadcarter.substack.com. And I'm just in the middle of publishing actually 15 articles on employee resource groups and how they went wrong, but how they can go so right. And so you'll see data on the employee resource group, HR, executive leaders, really kind of a fabulous gab.
Awesome. And I'll
Yeah.
put the links down in the show notes also for anybody who
Amazing.
can't type fast enough. We'll make it easy. This has been
Thank you.
awesome. Thank you so much.